2020, written by Stephen King, directed by Quentin Tarantino. Oi, oi, oi. That meme has been going around for months now. Some of you will have seen it online and outside stores. And just when we think that the horrors of this year could not get any worse, it does. The pandemic, the injustice, the breakdown of civility, the fires and the storms, and then just going into Rosh HaShanah with the incredibly sad news of the passing of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. It's been quite a year, and we are beginning 5781 like no other, with most of us in our homes, yearning to be together in community and connecting to one another, and yet not able to shake hands, to kiss, hug, or even look into each other's faces. Tremendous fear, loneliness, rage, confusion, despair haunt and control us so much of the time, and we have a prescient sense that our world has changed and that in some areas of our lives we may never return to what we have perceived as normal. And yet here we are. Hinenu. Hinenu. Here we are, present in different and unprecedented ways, doing the best that we can to be together while apart, hearts touching when hands cannot. From early on in this precarious journey, we tried to avoid the language social distancing and instead coined the phrase physical distancing, social connecting, spiritual deepening. And we hope that has been happening. Weddings, birthday parties, Bonai mitzvah, funerals, shivers, visits with relatives from far away, classes, seders, and now high holiday services are all online. Some of us have struggled enormously, been very sick, lost loved ones, lost jobs, lost hope. Many of us have felt the pain of isolation, starved of real human contact. Others have spent so much time with families that new tensions have arisen, juggling work and online school and meetings and too much time inside and on screens, testing relationships to their limits. High school graduations and college graduations that should have been joyful transitions and celebrations have become drive-bys and, yes, virtual ceremonies. And some of us have been doing remarkably well in spite of everything, balancing our lives and finding meaning, value, gratitude, blessings. How do we process all that has happened and the prospect of standing at the threshold of a new year with resilience and hope? For me, there was this immediate impulse when lockdown began that I had to live with purpose, with meaning, and that what I did had to matter. And there was this intensity early on in wanting to offer something every day, the videos and the podcasts, the stories, the emails, the phone calls, the Facebook posts, the Zoom and the live stream services. I feel good that we had an amazing, amazing team that acted really quickly to keep our community together as much as we could. And there were so many people who made that happen. So the first Shabbat of lockdown, here we were, live streaming a service from Bonai Shalom. But for me, there was also this exaggerated need to be validated, to be appreciated for what we were doing, for how I was showing up. And I became terrified that the alternative was staying in my PJs all day and binge watching shows on Netflix, and that that would become my reality and my life would have no meaning. I did do some of that, I admit. I watched some quite good shows, actually. I know that I'm not alone, and that it's really a fundamental need, a human need, especially when circumstances get really challenging, to feel useful and to feel that we have a purpose. For many of you, this was being a parent, a grandparent, a supportive child to a sick or elderly parent, a friend to someone homebound or sick, a volunteer for those in dire need. There have been millions of beautiful acts of chesed, kindnesses, acts of loving kindnesses all over the world that have inspired us, Some of you have courageously served on the front line as health workers and providers of essential services. Thank you. Thank you. Many have increased their activism in incredible ways, working for justice, for those on the margins, for racial, economic, and environmental justice. For others, having creative outlets like writing, painting, music, or spiritual practices of prayer and meditation, or being outside on the trails every day, breathing good air. And we all know how awful and dangerous the air is for much of this country right now. That was what gave us strength, the strength to keep going. I was particularly moved by the story of Captain, now Sir, Tom Moore in my native UK. He captured the heart of the country and maybe the world. On the 6th of April, at the age of 99, Tom Moore began to walk laps of his garden with his walker to raise money for NHS Charities Together, for National Health Service workers in appreciation of their frontline work during COVID-19. He had the goal of raising £1,000 by his 100th birthday. In the 24-day course of his fundraising, he made many media appearances and he became a popular household name in the United Kingdom. He even featured in a cover version of the song, "You'll Never Walk Alone," with all of the proceeds going to the same country. That single topped the UK music charts and made him the oldest person ever to achieve a UK #1. On the morning of his 100th birthday, the total raised by his walk was over £30 million and still rising. The Royal Air Force honoured him with a flypast and he received over 150,000 birthday cards. On the 17th of July, he was knighted by the Queen at Windsor Castle and became Captain Sir Tom Moore. When I asked people to share positive or impactful experiences during this time, the responses were really moving and wide-ranging. Some of our families living across the country and the world have become closer in unforeseen ways, with many of us celebrating and marking time together while apart. Several of you told me about the impact of Zoom family seders across states, the regular weekly Zoom calls with cousins far away, and the much more frequent calls with parents from different states. Some of you shared the power of virtual life cycle events like weddings, and others the joy of getting to know a new grandchild in the safety of hiking trails, or just the quiet joy of watching a baby grow a little more every day. I've heard the stories of creative distance birthday parties and safe gatherings outside with new appreciations of neighbors, and the tales of the experimental self-haircutting sagas. Some of you have had the great gift of much more unexpected time with adult children, getting to know each other more deeply. Sari, who had a baby in July, said, "Everything happened and I didn't even have to leave my house." Marnie said, just the simplicity of paring down activities. That part has been refreshing and lovely. Larry and Jody Ansel shared love in the time of Corona. Our daughter got married despite COVID. Julie adopted a new meditation and yoga practice, and Jim was able to fulfill a dream of many years and walk across the state of Colorado this summer. Personally, I was on 2 road trips covering 19 states, swimming in the Atlantic, the Pacific, and in many lakes in New England. I celebrated my mother's 80th birthday on Zoom. I got to know some of my cousins better, and I officiated some of the most extraordinary and beautiful weddings ever, including Dorian Barry's 2-hour hike in the White River National Forest with tent poles and a talit for the chuppah, with bride and groom in a wedding dress, tux and tails, and hiking boots. And Eric and Elaine's wedding with a 19-hour road trip to San Diego and a chuppah overlooking the ocean in La Jolla at the groom's grandparents' house. And the small Louisville outdoor wedding of Miriam and Aram, which became a very intimate indoor wedding in a living room after that freak snowstorm that we had last week. Even though this has been a terribly hard time to lose a loved one, as Sharon Corsina and Marilyn Pinsker experienced with the loss of their mothers. Some of the virtual funerals and shivers have brought many people together who would not have otherwise been able to be present to comfort the mourners. These are all, in a sense, stories of survival and making the very best possible of an excruciatingly challenging time. The absence of purpose can be paralyzing. Life without meaning can be dark and hopeless and impossible. And I'm sure many of us had plenty of those indistinguishable days. I know I did. Viktor Frankl, the Austrian Jewish psychiatrist who survived the horrors of Auschwitz and other concentration camps, thought and wrote deeply about these questions as a survivor of unimaginable brutality and dehumanization. Still, he sought meaning. And in 1946, he wrote Man's Search for Meaning, which has been deeply influential. And at the time of Frankl's death in 1997, the book had sold over 10 million copies and been translated into 24 languages. I've been rereading it recently. Just this year, Yes to Life in Spite of Everything was published as a rediscovered and translated book of a series of lectures that Frankl gave in Vienna just 11 months after he was liberated from the camps. In his more well-known book, Frankl says, what was really needed was a fundamental change in our attitude toward life. We had to learn ourselves, and furthermore, we had to teach the despairing men that it did not really matter what we expected from life, but rather what life expected from us. We needed to stop asking about the meaning of life and instead to think of ourselves as those who were being questioned by life daily and hourly. One answer must consist not in talk and meditation, but in right action and in right conduct. Life ultimately means taking the responsibility to find the right answer to its problems and to fulfill the tasks which it constantly sets for each individual. And then a few pages later he adds, for the meaning of life differs from person to person, actually he says man to man, from day to day and from hour to hour. What matters therefore is not the meaning of life in general, but rather the specific meaning of a person's life at a given moment. We have so little control, really, of what happens to us, our loved ones, our community, and our world. And each of us will make different choices in response to the events of our lives. The aching heart of our High Holiday liturgy is the haunting prayer that we're going to be chanting soon, Unatane Tokef, which seems to promise a cruel randomness to suffering and to death, with our fate being determined and sealed in these days of awe. Who by fire? Who by water? Who by plague? Painfully poignant in this moment. And then the refrain that says, Teshuva utefila utzedakah marvim et roah hagezerah, that returning and praying and giving help, that returning and praying and giving help us transcend the sting of the decrees that befall us. In the last of the 3 lectures in Yes to Life, again written less than a year after he was liberated from hell, Frankl says, we are not able to direct fate. We must describe fate as whatever we have no influence over, whatever escapes the power of our will. Certainly, we have seen that the meaning of our lives consists in no small part in how we relate to our external fate, how we behave toward it when we can no longer shape it or when it is unalterable from the outset. I imagine most of us have felt in these months the powerlessness of not being able to shape our fate, the disappearance of agency as we see the world we have known diminish. But it's important to think that nevertheless, we can choose how to respond and how to act. And that, as Frankl says, even suffering contributes to meaning and is part of the meaning of life. A man once visited the Holy Maggid of Mezrich, And he said that he had great problems, difficulties, applying the saying in the Talmud that says a person is equally obligated to say a bracha, a blessing, over the bad as they are to recite a blessing over the good. Hara and Hatov. The Maggid told him to find his disciple Reb Zusha of Hanepoli and ask him. The man went and found Reb Zusha, who received him very warmly, and he invited him to his home. And when the guest came in, he saw how desperately poor the family was. There was almost nothing to eat. Their clothes were threadbare, and they all seemed to have afflictions and illnesses. Nevertheless, Reb Zusha was happy, positive and cheerful. The guest was astonished at this scene, and he said, you know, I went to the Holy Maggid to ask him how it's possible to say a blessing over the bad as we do for the good. And the Maggid told me that the only person who can help understand this is you. Reb Zusha said, this is indeed a very interesting and perplexing question. But why did our Holy Rebbe send you to me? How would I know? He should have sent you to someone who has experienced suffering. Perspective, attitude, and right action play enormous roles in how we walk through this complicated, painful, broken, beautiful world. My rabbi and friend in London, Rabbi Jonathan Wittenberg, offers a comment on the Untitled Chapter prayer in his book, Eternal Journey. He says, the evil of the decree cannot be avoided. It is to this that we are born, but it can be transcended through the way we live, through returning to our capacity to love, through prayer which nourishes and inspires us, and through doing what is compassionate and just. Can we say yes to life in spite of everything that has befallen us this year? Can we find inner resolve, deeper spirituality, increased love and generosity and dignity? To say yes to life, says Frankl, is not only meaningful under all circumstances, because life itself is, but it is also possible under all circumstances. Saying yes to life. Hineni, here I am, ready to show up and to answer the call to live with purpose and possibility, with integrity, a rich inner life, compassion and loving kindness. Just last Shabbat we read Moses' stirring speech to the Israelites in Nitzavim, which concludes with the words, HaChayim v'hamavet natati lefanecha, habracha v'haklala u'vechata b'chayim. I have placed before you, says Moses, life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life. Uvechata b'chayim. Say yes to life. We have seen the best and the absolute worst of humanity this year. And with an incredibly important election just a few weeks away, there are some terrifying scenarios with painful and violent divisions in this nation, which have possibly not been as bad as this since the Civil War. Abraham Lincoln's first inaugural address as president of a very deeply divided union expressed that the only hope of reconciliation and healing would come in his appeal to the better angels of our nature. Almost 160 years later, Congressman John Lewis closed the letter that he wrote to us all to be published on the day of his funeral on July 30th, which actually coincided with Tisha B'Av, with these words. He said, when historians pick up their pens to write the story of the 21st century, let them say that it was your generation who laid down the heavy burdens of hate at last, and that peace finally triumphed over violence, aggression, and war. So I say to you, walk with the wind, brothers and sisters, and let the spirit of peace and the power of everlasting love be your guide. Both of these great men, these great leaders, somehow held on to hope and to vision. The book of Proverbs, Mishlei, says, hope deferred makes the heart sick. Hope deferred makes the heart sick. At the end of the last essay in his book, Yes to Life in Spite of Everything, Viktor Frankl quotes that verse to talk about his observations working in mental health and how the loss of hope contributes to illness. He says, so you can see that spiritual and mental decline due to losing one's inner hold, especially due to a loss of a hold on the future, also leads to a physical decline. We cannot give up on the future and give in to despair, however desperate and bleak it might seem. There is plenty of legitimate fear, rage, and sadness, but we need hope, purpose, and love to keep us strong and healthy. Kaveh al Adonai chazak v'yametz libecha v'kaveh al Adonai. Hope in the eternal. Be strong and courageous and hope in the eternal. Kaveh, kaveh, kaveh. This is how Psalm 27 that we recite twice daily from the beginning of Elul until the end of Sukkot. That's how it ends. Hope, courage, strength, resilience. 2020, written by Stephen King and directed by Quentin Tarantino. Well, 2020 is not over yet. When the year began 9 months ago, we talked about having 2020 vision. The real depth of vision often comes with hindsight. So when we look back on this year, maybe, just maybe, there will be all kinds of new understandings and meaningful lessons that will emerge as we forge new realities for ourselves. Hayom Harat Olam. Hayom Harat Olam. Today the world is born. Today is pregnant with infinite seeds of possibility. 2020, written by Stephen King and directed by Quentin Tarantino, maybe. Today we start 5781. 5781, written by each of us into the book of Yes to Life and directed by the better angels of our nature. Shana Tova.